Good morning and welcome back to One Step at a Time Farmstead. I'm Lucas and I'm so glad that you joined us today. As a hobby, I enjoy homebrewing some craft beers and fruit wine ciders and even distilling some craft whiskies and brandies, rums, and making liqueurs from it and stuff like that. My wife really loves the fruit wine that I make. A while ago, we made some mixed berries, wine from some mixed berries, and she really loved it. That was her favorite. Out of everything that I made, that mixed berry wine was her favorite. So she asked me to make another batch. Okay, obviously at this moment we don't have a lot of our own berries and fruits and stuff like that. So yeah, next best thing is to buy fruit juices. And she picked this berry blaze from Liquid Fruit. Now there's nothing wrong with using store-bought fruit juices as long as it doesn't have any preservatives in, especially that potassium phosphate that will stall your fermentation, as quick as you start it. This doesn't have any preservatives in. The ingredients here is apple or grape or pear juice, which some will then argue that I'm making a cider and not a wine, but we'll get into that later. It's got mixed berry juices like strawberry puree and blackcurrant juice. It's got guava puree. It's got citrus. So yeah, we're going to use this juice to make some fruit juice wine. But as she asked me to make a new batch for her, she suggested that I make a video about it because it relates to homesteading, self-sufficiency, and also preserving. So should you have a great abundance of fruits and you've canned all that you can and you've preserved all that you can in a certain way and you still have left over, you can always use those fruits, especially if it comes to the end of the season and it's going to start rotting away. You can use those fruits to make your own wine, and that's another way to preserve your harvest as well. So we discussed it and decided to make like a beginner's course to brewing your own alcoholic beverages, brewing and distilling. Yeah, we decided to make like a tutorial, a guide on it, course on it. But again, to keep it as simple and as straightforward and as unintimidating as possible. Because a lot of people, I find, are interested in the hobbies, of beer making or distilling. And there's people going into so much technical and scientific detail, that it seems so intimidating that they rather, back away and never do it. So our objective for this course is to keep it as simple, as straightforward, and as enjoyable for everyone who is interested in starting their own brewing journey without getting too involved in the technical and the scientific mumbo jumbo, that leaves one normally intimidated and overwhelmed. Just another thing, just remember that our ancestors all over the world, in every continent, for thousands of years, they have produced their own alcoholic beverages without any sophisticated equipment and rule books and do's and don'ts and all these kinds of regulations. They simply took the natural process that happens in nature and harnessed it to produce their own wines, beers, and ciders, meats, and stuff like that. So it's really not that difficult and intimidating and complex as one might believe. So this brings us to the basics of home brewing. There are basically 3 ingredients that you require to make an alcoholic beverage, and that is sugar, water, and yeast. Those 3 simple ingredients will allow you to make an alcoholic beverage. Fermentable sugar, yeast, and water. Simple as that. Okay, so let's start with sugar. One of the first questions that I will get is, okay, can I make alcohol from normal table sugar? And the answer, quite simply, is yes, you can. Although I'll advise against it, unless you are going to distill a neutral base alcohol that you are going to use in another product like gin or a liqueur or something like that. The reason for this is that your yeast needs other nutrients and minerals other than just the sugar to thrive and be healthy, and in order not to get stressed and produce all kinds of off flavors and smells because it is under stress and obviously not really healthy. Let us think about our own bodies. We need all kinds of nutrients and minerals in order for our body to become and remain healthy and not stressed. That is why we want to grow our own healthy foods, because it's nutrient dense. And comparing that to our industrialized foods, which have a lot of calories, but it's not really nutritional. So we eat and we get fat, obese, and we remain sickly because our bodies don't receive all those healthy nutrients that we need in order to become healthy and to remain healthy. But yes, we get a lot of energy. Excess of energy gets stored into fat. Our bodies don't function properly. Mental health and all those things start becoming an issue as well, along with other medical problems. So that is why we use sugars that we get from fruits and the fruit juices, from honey, and even from the starch in grains that we convert to fermentable sugars. Yeah, so we use either fresh juice, fruit juices. You can use dried fruit. You can use grain. You can use honey, and all those things make different types of alcoholic beverages. As a generalized, there's some words that Afrikaans people struggle to say, and this is one of them. Generalized. As a generalized practice, we say that we make wine and ciders from fruits and berries, and there's also some dispute about that. Some people say no, wine is grapes only, but at the end of the day, we accept that we make wines and ciders from fruits and berries. We make mead from honey, and we make beers from grains like barley and wheat and sorghum, corn, rice, grains. The second ingredient that we want to discuss is water. Water is an integral ingredient as it provides the ideal, I want to say environment, but the environment is, we'll touch on that a bit later. It provides the ideal medium or landscape for the fermentation process. You need clean, unchlorinated water, but I would advise against using purified reverse osmosis or distilled water, because water in itself also carries some minerals and nutrients. So clean, unchlorinated water. Okay, water should also not be contaminated with other bacteria such as acetobacter that might turn your fermentation, your alcohol, into vinegar, or other bacteria that might completely spoil your fermentation. So we try to keep it as clean and sterile as possible, but without, removing all the minerals and nutrients that are carried in water. I use normal tap water that I boil in order to sterilize it and to boil off any chlorine that might be in the system, and then I let it cool down to room temperature before I use it. You can do it the day before, or you can do it a couple of days before and keep it in a sealed container. It's up to you. The third ingredient that I want to talk about is our yeast. Okay? Now, there's thousands of different varieties of yeast all around us in our environment. It's on your skin, it's on the skin of your fruits, it's everywhere, it's inside fruit, it's all over the environment. And some of these wild yeast might be beneficial to your fermentation process and do exactly the same thing that brewer's yeast would do, while others might be detrimental to your fermentation and even spoil it if it's not properly controlled. This is why we firstly introduce our wanted yeast, strain of yeast, to the process in order to establish a strong colony within our wash or must. And secondly, we establish a strictly controlled environment in which the fermentation process is conducted. Okay, one might ask if one cannot use the wild yeast in order to produce the alcohol. And yes, you can. Our ancestors have done it for thousands of years. But you also don't know what other yeasts or bacteria, organisms you introduce to your wash as well. And you don't know what effect that will have on your fermentation. And you also won't be able to get a consistent results from batch to batch. Just like sourdough bread. Those of you that have baked sourdough bread and made your own sourdough starter and stuff like that, you always say that each and every batch of bread tastes different because each and every starter is different, because the yeasts that you introduce are different. And that's a fun experiment and a tasty one as well. But if you want to have consistent results in your fermentation, time after time, you want to be able to control your fermentation process. So this specific strain of yeast that we want to introduce to our wash is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a Latin word that's difficult to pronounce for an Afrikaans person, but I've done the best that I can. Okay, now it's exactly the same yeast that you use to make bread. Exactly the same thing. The only difference is how it was cultured. Bread yeast was cultured on grains and developed to produce more CO2, which is the little bubbles that let your dough rise. And brewer's yeast has been cultured and developed to produce alcohol and maybe a little less CO2. But it's developed to have a higher tolerance to alcohol before it dies. I'm sure that you've seen or heard people speak about wine yeast or beer yeast or lager yeast or meat yeast. That's all the same yeast. It's just that it has been cultured in that medium for optimal performance in that process. So for this exercise, I'm going to use normal brewer's yeast. Why? Because it's available at almost every grocery store and accessible to basically everybody, and it's cheap and it's just as functional. You can even use normal bread yeast because it's the same yeast. So the reason why we introduce our yeast into our wash is to make sure that we establish a strong colony of the yeast that will dominate basically any other yeasts that might be in our wash. So we introduce it into the environment and it will establish a colony and grow and spread from there and basically dominate any other yeasts that are there. Then we need to ensure that our environment is completely controlled. Now, this yeast thrives in a poor oxygen environment. So that is why we create the environment by putting our wash in our fermenter, and then we close it off with a lid, and we put our bubbler on there in order for the gases to escape, the CO2 gas that is produced by the yeast, and also to keep any oxygen coming in. If you've ever made vinegar, you know that it's exactly the same process. But when you introduce the acetobacter and oxygen into your alcohol, the acetobacter basically eats the alcohol and then turns it into vinegar. So we want to eliminate that. We want to control our environment that doesn't happen. So no air coming back in, and we only produce the alcohol. So that brings us to our equipment that we need. Now, basic equipment that you will need is a primary fermentation vessel. For primary, I use plastic, a plastic container where my wash will be in with the water and my yeast and the fermentable sugars, and it will happen in here. Like I said, we need to seal it off, to keep oxygen from coming in. So this is my primary fermentation vessel. As the process develops, the yeast will consume the sugar. It will produce alcohol and CO2 and heat. The gas will escape, the CO2, carbon dioxide will escape, and we are then turning this liquid into an alcoholic beverage. As it consumes the sugars, some sediments will fall out and lie on the bottom, as well as some dead yeast cells. And we will do it in this fermentation vessel until our fermentation is visibly finished. There's no more bubbles, there's no more activity, it's visibly done. Then we will siphon our liquid from our primary fermentation vessel to our secondary fermentation vessel. And this one is a glass one. Okay, we will siphon it out without aerating the liquid at all. We don't want to, like I said, introduce any other bacteria, so we siphon it without aerating it, and from that vessel to this vessel, and without pulling any of the sediments through. Now this is what we call our second fermentation, or the second fermentation vessel. So this is just to check that it clarifies even more. If there's any fermentation that needs to finish, it will finish in here. Sediments again will trickle down to the bottom and your wash will clarify. Now, if there's any sediments that trickle down to the bottom, it will be significantly less than in your first fermentation. Okay, so I normally let this take about a week or so, but depending on your own observation, you can basically decide for yourself when your wine is ready. Another piece of equipment that you will need is an airlock or a bubbler. I refer to it as a bubbler. Okay, and you don't need this. You can use a hose, with the hole in the lid, a hose coming down into a normal jar that is half filled with water, and it's just so that the gas can escape again. The hose will be under the level of the water, it will bubble through, and no air can be pulled back into your fermentation. So you don't need a bubbler, you can just use a hose and a jar. I enjoy these bubblers because they are tiny and compact and fit right there, and you don't have anything in your way. And it's cheap. Basically, here's a line here that you fill your water level here. Okay, and what will happen is as your fermentation produces gas, it will push up the tube through here, bubble through the water, and escape from the top. The water, or some people put sanitizer in, some people put alcohol in. I put normal water in. It's just to ensure that no air, oxygen, is being pulled back into your wash. The hose we can use to siphon from the first fermentation vessel to the next vessel, and also to bottle when your process is finished, to bottle it so that you can store it away. Also use it as your airlock. The next thing is a sanitizer. It's very important before you do anything to completely sanitize and clean your vessels and equipment. Now, a lot of people buy expensive sanitizers, and some people will promote it, and it's good to have. It's nothing wrong with it. It's perfect. But also, normal dish soap and warm water will clean and sanitize your equipment. You can even use boiling water to sanitize it like you do when canning. It's not a problem. All you want to do is clean everything and peel off any bacteria that might be present in your vessels or on your equipment. Another thing that is very important, it's not necessary, but I would advise of having one, is a hydrometer. The reason for that, let me just open it here. Okay, now this is a 3-scale hydrometer. Okay, this one is marked in bricks or gravity, and also it's got a scale for your alcohol by volume. Okay, why this is so nice to have, although it's not completely necessary, is that it gives me my data point. So what you do is you take your first, your original gravity or first gravity reading of, before you add any yeast to your wash, take the gravity reading of the wash, and it will give you a certain reading on the scale. And if you look at it, it will show you the potential alcohol by volume that you might be able to create from the wash. And then after your fermentation is completely complete, you take a final gravity reading, and basically then you can ensure that your fermentation has completed completely in the first place, and second place you can determine the alcohol by volume in your wine. Okay, it's not to be confused with your alcohol meter or a proof and trail alcohol meter. This is what we use in distilling, to measure the alcohol content in your distillate. Okay, another one, also not completely necessary, but it's handy to use with your hydrometer, is your test tube cylinder. It fits my hydrometer perfectly, and it's easy to monitor without me having to struggle by putting it in the wash or bucket or whatever the case might be. Another nice to have but not completely necessary thing is a kitchen scale. If you are going to add additional sugar to your wash to ferment in order to bump up your alcohol, it's not, the kitchen scale is just nice to measure that as well. So this concludes basically our introductory video on the basics of home brewing. In the next video, we will start with, the fermentation process of making my wife a lovely berry blaze wine from store-bought juice. Just another thing that I quickly want to touch on is your fermentation vessel. You don't need any special equipment. You can use a bucket with a lid. You can use a jar or a container like this. Just as long as you've got a container that can seal, seal out any oxygen or air coming in. You can take a bucket and put a little hole in the lid for your hose or your bubbler. You can use even your containers where your juices or milk or whatever, as long as it's food grade, you can use it. It's not necessary to be glass. Like I said, for my primary fermentation, I use, my plastic container. I've got bigger ones, 25 liters, where I just use the bucket, especially if I make beer. And then my secondary fermentation vessel is glass. So you don't need any fancy equipment. Like the hydrometer, you don't need it, but it is nice to have because it gives you a bit of extra, not really control, but to measure your fermentation process, and to see what's going on. Yeah, that's it. So thank you for spending the day with us. If I may ask you a big favor, please like and subscribe this video. Share it with your friends. And any questions, please email me. I'll add my email address here at the bottom. Or pop a question in the comments. I would really love to be more interactive with you guys. And, respond to you. It will keep me busier. It will keep me a lot more focused. There are things going on, in the garden. Garden is going off perfectly well. But yeah, I really want this channel to grow. The only way that I can do it is to ask you to please like, subscribe, share, and please make some contact. I really want to get in touch, just say it. Even if you've got some criticism, quite on there. Let me know, speak to me. I enjoy having contact and a conversation with people. And it's one thing if you watch the video, but it's another thing if we actually interact. And then I know at least I'm reaching somebody. Or even if I'm boring you to death, tell me, listen, dude, you are boring me to death. But at least then I know. Okay. So thank you for spending the day with us. I will move over into the second video now. So you can, just follow on that. But I'll cut this video off here and say thank you for spending time with me. It's a joy. It's something that I enjoy doing. And yes, may God bless you. And I love you. See you in the next video. Bye.